Alright everybody, so welcome to our last lesson here in the Progressive Era. So today we're going to talk about Presidents Taft and Wilson, okay? So our objectives and standards are to understand the change in presidential policies during the Progressive Era and to analyze the impact of Progressive Era policies. Take a moment there to look over the standards, please. Excuse me. And our desired result. What changes in policies occurred under President Taft and President Wilson? So Roosevelt leaves office. Teddy Roosevelt decided to leave office as president after 2 terms. He decides to help his Secretary of War, William Howard Taft, who you'll see here in the picture here, win the election and become president in 1908. So here we have President Roosevelt, his Secretary of War, William Howard Taft. Again, so Taft will become president. Little side note, I'm actually related to President Taft on my dad's side, which is kind of interesting. Theodore Roosevelt does assume that Taft will continue the policies that he had put in place. However, Taft is soon going to set his own agenda and approve the Payne-Aldrich tariff, which did not lower tariffs or taxes on foreign goods as much as Roosevelt had wanted. So President Taft also pushed Congress to pass the Mann-Elkins Act, which gave the government control of the telephone and telegraph rates, and he also dropped Roosevelt's distinction of what was a good trust and what was a bad trust. Sorry for my voice squeaking there a little bit. So a clash of leaders. So Roosevelt and other progressives became angry when President Taft fired Gifford Pinchot, right down here at the bottom, who had criticized the top man here, Secretary of the Interior Richard A. Bollinger. Now, Pinchot had been the chief of the United States Forestry Service. According to Pinchot, he claimed that Bollinger, who had opposed Roosevelt's conservation policies, worked with businesses to sell to sell government land for resources. Now, later investigations did clear Bollinger of any wrongdoing, but the damage was done. Theodore Roosevelt began traveling the country and promoting a program to restore the trust-busting power of the government known as New Nationalism. And he said he would tackle the trust in a 3rd term as president. Now, with this, other progressives split from the Republican Party to form the Progressive Party, or the Bull Moose Party. Where that comes from is that Roosevelt had declared himself as strong as this really tough animal, a bull moose, and I'm as strong as a bull moose. So the nickname for the party was the Bull Moose Party as well. But either way, a lot of Republicans split from the Republican Party to support Roosevelt instead. So, advantages. Republicans continued to support and nominate President Taft for the election of 1912. However, it divided the Republican Party left an advantage for the Democrats, and others for that matter. Woodrow Wilson had been a professor, president of Princeton University, and governor of New Jersey. And he decides to run for president as a Democrat in 1912 and called his program the New Freedom. Now, the plan would place strict restrictions on businesses while promoting better opportunities and freedom for small businesses. Now, Eugene V. Debs, his picture up top here, was a Socialist Party candidate, also decided to run as well. Put run down there at the bottom. Sorry about that. And President Wilson is on the side there. So here's a map of the election of 1912. You can see that Wilson pretty much wins most of the country, right? Now, he didn't win a majority of the popular vote, but he received enough electoral college votes to become the next president. What happens here is, because there was a split in the Republican Party between Taft and Roosevelt, this limited the power and strength of the Republican Party in terms of winning the election. Now, Eugene V. Debs, he simply didn't receive enough votes to win any electoral college votes. Sorry about that. But this will be the first time in 60 years that a Southern man will be elected president. The reason I say that is Woodrow Wilson was actually from Virginia and moved to New Jersey. But so this will be the first time in 60 years that a Southern man will become elected president. So Wilson as president. Democratic President Woodrow Wilson decided to expand the power of the federal government in terms of financing and other reforms. He's going to push for new laws that will bring down the power of the tariffs, the banks, and the trust. So let's talk about tariffs first. Wilson pushed for the passage of the Underwood Tariff Bill, which cut tariffs, so if Americans wanted to buy foreign goods, they could afford to do so. The problem is that the tariffs, now with the loss in the tariff money, they need something to kind of build up the money for the federal government. With the Underwood Tariff Act, there was a provision in it, or a section in it, that established the graduated income tax. So under the 16th Amendment, Congress has the power to collect an income tax without restrictions. And if you talk to your parents or if you have a job right now, you probably know something about the income tax, where every April 15th taxes are due and your parents have to submit their tax returns and things like that. So this is where this comes from. Now, the argument and battle over the income tax still does occur today, but as of right now, it is still legal and things like that. So the government does collect an income tax. Fixing finances. President Wilson also wanted to change the banking system. So in the country at the time, there was no really type of central authority to supervise banks or check in on banks. So in 1913, Congress passed the Federal Reserve Act, and it placed banks under the control of the Federal Reserve Board. What this means is, and I'll show you on a map here, it'll make sense in a little bit, but regional banks were set up to control funds to commercial banks like to Wells Fargo or Citizens Bank or things like that. And this is a system that's still in place today. And the Federal Reserve does still set interest rates for like loans or student loans or things like that, and also monetary policy such as like how much money is in circulation in the country right now. Now, just like the income tax, some argue for and against the Federal Reserve as well. So this map here kind of gives you an idea about the Federal Reserve District. So you can see in terms of Pennsylvania, it's kind of divided between the 4th Reserve District and the 3rd, right? So what that means is that we are controlled, like where I am, I'm outside Philadelphia, so I'm in District 3, so with part of New Jersey and Delaware there. What that means is a lot of my banks, or the bank that I use, is controlled by the 3rd District and, gets a lot of their policies and money from them. So you can kind of see how it works across the country. So it's just basically a system for banks to be able to be checked up on and things like that, make sure that banks are doing the right stuff. So Wilson advances reforms. President Wilson also focused on trust. He persuaded Congress to pass the Federal Trade Commission, or the FTC, in 1914. So the job of this organization, since it's still around today, is they monitor business practices that could lead to a monopoly and checking for false advertising or dishonest labeling. So sometimes you might hear on the news that the FTC is looking into, I don't know, an internet company or Facebook or whatever the case may be. They're looking into different things to make sure they're not doing unfair business practices. The Clayton Antitrust Act was also passed in 1914 that expanded on previous antitrust laws. So President Wilson also worked for worker rights too. Under the Clayton Antitrust Act, labor unions were protected from big businesses, and in 1916, the Working Man's Compensation Law gave wages to temporarily disabled civil service workers. So what that means is people like the post office or things like that, they were able to get wages for them if they were temporarily disabled. Now, unfortunately, Wilson did not always support worker rights, such as the case in the Ludlow massacre in Colorado. When coal miners went on strike, they were evicted from their homes and they formed a tent city. Now, the Colorado National Guard eventually showed up and burned the tent city and opened fire, killing 26 men, women, and children. Following the massacre, however, Wilson did send federal troops to restore order, but still, you can kind of see the change there as well. All right, so our closure. So what changes in policies occurred under President Taft and President Wilson? Think about how they compared to President Roosevelt. What was the differences or the similarities between both of them? And that will help you answer your questions for today. I hope you have a great rest of your day or night, and I hope to talk to you all soon. Take care.